Joined us. I'm Terry Goolsby from Horizon Stewardship. I am a senior vice president and have worked in this field of generosity and stewardship for 17 years now. Full disclosure, I have worked with Janet in the Fort Worth Diocese some years past in a feasibility study. And Michael, I've gotten to know just recently, so I'm really thrilled to be with you and to join with you. I do want to introduce an administrative assistant at Horizons, Latresa Wilson, who's going to kind of walk us through the particulars of how to communicate and ask questions as part of this webinar. Once she's finished with all of that, she can turn it back over to me and we will get started. So here's Latresa.
Hi everyone. At the bottom of your screen, you will notice there is a Q&A button. At any time during the presentation, you can click on that button and ask a question. If it's a technical question, you'll probably hear from me. But what we're going to do is we're going to hold on to those questions until the last 30 minutes of the presentation when Terry or one of your canons will address it. Terry?
Thanks, Latresa. So it's a new day, isn't it? We found ourselves trying to lead where we've never been before. And in all of my years of doing this work, I can tell you I've never been here either. I've talked to a number of priests and parishes where I've worked previously and am helping now. And the word I'm hearing is exhausted and somewhat fearful of next steps. So what we're going to look at today are what we think are the foundational pieces of having a successful annual stewardship program and increasing generosity in your parish. So a little bit of background. I am an Episcopalian by choice. I like to say that I'm a flag-waving, card-carrying, proud Episcopalian who left the Baptist Church and swam the Great Divide. When I have worked in Catholic parishes, the priests always tell me, you've got one more step, and that's to cross the Tiber, swim it, and come home. I'm happy where I am right now. So I live in Dallas. My parish is Church of the Incarnation. And let me go ahead and get us started then. So as we're moving forward, I know that this is a unique time, and I'm trying to forward through this. Let's see. The nice thing is Latresa has a backup for me, so just in case, we'll switch over to her, but I think I've got it now. The local church has changed. We know that. Ministry needs and opportunities are increasing. Here's the bad news, or worse news maybe. Giving to religion is at an all-time low. 20 or 30 years ago, we had a large population giving to religion in some way, whether it was the local church or a religious organization. Today, we're continuing to see that drop. And so if you're feeling that pinch within your own parish, it's understandable. But we know this, thinking the same way is not an option anymore. And I had a priest who recently said, we have crammed 10 years of technology into 6 months of trying to move forward. So if you're doing a lot of Zoom meetings, which I am, it would seem like those are pretty easy, but they're exhausting as well. And just trying to stream or provide ministry around your services and other ministries is a challenge today. There is no doubt about it. Here's what remains true. These are the foundational pieces that I want to walk us through today, that we were born to be loving and giving. John 3:16 is the easiest one to remember. For God so loved the world that he gave. Generosity is a journey. We like to say in the area of gratitude, and it's revealed through prayer. And generosity is a part of our responsibility as Christ followers. Now, I'm going to unpack this, but this is kind of what we're looking at today. In the center of this diagram, if you will, is the word vision of who you are as a parish and what you've been called to be. Then I want to start on the top right. These are the foundational pieces that I think will serve you well as we move forward. Keep it spiritual. Discipleship is the foundation of any generosity initiative. Tell your ministry story, effectively communicating how you are transforming lives. Cuts through what the culture has to say about money. Back years ago when I was at a church in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, we did something that was unique to many churches at that time, and we had something called a dedication of gifts. So this was a Baptist church, very traditional Baptist church, and we would take the offering, we would sing the doxology as the offering plates were brought back toward the chancel, and then either clergy or a parishioner would walk to the pulpit and say something like this: I dedicate your gifts to the glory of God and in grateful thanks for Vacation Bible School, in which we had 21 children last week, 5 of them from at-risk homes, 5 of whom went home with a backpack full of school supplies. Your giving made Vacation Bible School and those backpacks a possibility. Thanks be to God. Something like that was done every single week. What we found that we were doing before this was that we were promoting the next big thing, but we were never coming back and adequately telling the story of the effects of that big thing. So the dedication of gifts was utilized every week, believe it or not, with a different story. This kind of goes against the grain of tell your ministry story. I got stuck with the dedication of gifts, and I really would say I got stuck in August when we closed the church for 2 weeks, except for worship, to refurbish it, to clean it, fresh paint and such. There were no ministry opportunities taking place. And so I went to the finance office and I said, how much was our electric bill last year for the month of August? And I don't remember the number now, but I'm going to guess it was 1,000. It was a fairly large church plant. So let's go with that idea. It was $1,000. And my dedication of gifts was, I dedicate your gifts to the glory of God and in grateful thanks for a well-lit, well-air-conditioned sanctuary or church within which we can worship today when it's 98 degrees outside and 98% humidity. Thanks be to God for your giving and for a cool, well-lit place to worship this day. Amen. The first thing that happened after that was I had a church member who came up after the service and said, we need to be turning off lights in this place because $1,000, that's ridiculous. What I did convey was that their giving provided something, and that was a well-lit, well-cooled church to worship in. But then when we got near the annual stewardship time, I had a parishioner who came up and said, you know, Terry, we don't really need stewardship sermons during this season. We get those every single week with the dedication of gifts. And I told her that's the biggest compliment you could have paid me. It's that statement right there. We didn't stop. I mean, we still had stewardship sermons, but it was her way of saying, I'm connecting stewardship with what you're saying in these dedication of gifts. Now, since then, the church has said, are we waiting too late to tell our story? In other words, we've already taken up the offering. Could we be telling that story sooner, just prior to the offering? And they have switched now, and they now have a missional story just before the offertory. So at my church at Incarnation in Dallas, we have what I call halftime, when the service breaks in the middle, and we have information sharing, announcements, and things like that, and that takes place then. But it's going back and telling your ministry story is one of those principles that we really think we should be working through. And I'm going to unpack these in more detail here in a second. Build donor relationships. The church's relationship with its financial supporter is sacred and requires careful tending. Making the ask, and this is a time when sensitivity is key. When we know that we have parishioners who have not been touched in any way financially by the COVID virus, and we have others who have lost their jobs or who have been scaled back significantly from their job. And so how do we approach this in a sensitive way, and yet knowing we are asking and calling people to support the church and its effectiveness in the kingdom of God? So we'll talk about that here in a second as well. And then measuring effectiveness. I'm going to stop and just go ahead and tell you that we mostly always seem to talk about what's the average pledge, what's our average giving, and I refer to that as the mean, and I made some notes here. But there are a couple of other ways of measuring effectiveness, and that is the median. And the median is the middle value when a data set is ordered from least to greatest. And then the mode is the number that occurs most often in the data set. So you might be looking to say, what is our average pledge? What is the one that shows up the most? Is it $500 a week? Is it $500 a month? Whatever that number is. That's a better way of measuring, frankly, how we're doing financially. So what is God calling you to do with the resources provided? To me, the center of every generosity discussion is the vision to which God is calling you. And I'm not talking about your mission statement here. I'm really talking about the vision of why you exist and who is your ministry. And so that is your focus, your reason to exist. And years ago, I was working in a parish in Colorado Springs, and they had been through some rough times, and they were very concerned about themselves and their sustainability. And we got into a feasibility study focus group, and I could hear all the negativity. And I let them talk for a while, and then I stopped them and I said, so tell me, whatever would happen if St. Smithens fell off the face of the earth? And it took them by surprise. And then they began to speak about, well, for us, we welcome all people. For us, it's missions to the community. For us, and they began to walk through, which was really their vision of ministry. And it changed the whole tone of that meeting. So what you're focusing on is, what is God calling you to do with the resources that have been provided to you to use? And so that's one area that you want to tie all of these pieces back, as we are called to be a people who reach out in outreach and missions, or whatever that might be, even more specific than that. So keeping it spiritual, discipleship is the foundation of any generosity initiative. Preaching and teaching generosity is a year-round thing. Now, I know we tend to fall into the pattern of October, November, whenever that might be, is when we start talking about generosity, in particular to pledging the budget. And please stop using that term. As my oldest son says, there is nothing sexy about pledging a budget. So what you can say is pledging to the ministries of the church, rather than just, we're going to pledge this budget this year and we need to get you to fill out a pledge card. So if you can move into more of a generosity year-round approach, it's beneficial to you as well. That storytelling is a great way to become far more year-round generosity. And I'm not talking about bashing people over the heads. I'm just talking about keeping things spiritual and connecting what you were doing in mission and vision to giving and to generosity. So the second bullet says one or more church-wide generosity. That really should say, I guess, foci each year, or focus, as I think both are okay. But we know that we typically, most often in our parishes, do the seasonal annual stewardship, but moving that into something else that might be a Lenten practice of generosity, an Advent, seasonal types of things. Stewardship, giving, and generosity are part of your discipleship path. I'm never apologetic about that. And we really try to work with churches in articulating the theology of stewardship and generosity. That stewardship and generosity theology statement really helps in guiding who will be on your vestry, who will take leadership roles within your parish. And I'll talk about that in a minute, in a little more detail. Telling your ministry stories. So I've talked about some of this, your weekly offering talks, the frequent use of storytelling in all church communications. I'm working with a church now who does a great job of the weekly offering talks, but they haven't transported that into their newsletter. And it says here, the third bullet, focus on one life at a time. So when I was telling the story about the heating and air conditioning, that was certainly not talking about one life, but it was talking more of a general thing, so to speak. So this is really talking about breaking apart and talking about one life at a time. And I know that in churches, we have to be courteous and not share too much, but we do at times have good stories that we can tell. Years ago, I was working in a church in Virginia in a capital campaign, and they were redoing their parish hall. And they were struggling with the fact that it seemed to be all about them, and it was not about anyone else. But I learned that on Tuesday nights, they opened their parish hall and fed the homeless. So we talked about putting maybe a small little video together about this parish hall and its ministries, etc. And I suggested they find someone who comes and partakes of that generous meal and let them tell their story of how that meal was a provision for them and sustainability. And she sold the parish hall renovation by just telling about how important the church was in her life and how the food provided for her the sustenance to move and to work forward. So share the stories of those impacted by your ministries as they did this lady, and those who are transformed because they shared their time and they shared their money. So generosity is also time and talent, isn't it? Build your donor relationships. I find that we tend as a church to fall into the category of almost like country club dues. Pardon that expression. Again, I got that from my oldest son. He was asked to come to a stewardship committee at his church and speak on behalf of millennials. And he has a very successful job. And I think they thought, well, if we get this younger guy in here, we'll learn specific things about how to approach millennials. And so this was a conference table with 12 very financially secure people sitting around the table. And his first comment was, number one, you don't ask a millennial to come and speak for millennials. Number two, I grew up a Baptist. So I had those little offering envelopes that said, have you read your Sunday school lesson? Have you given your offering? Have you attended church, et cetera, et cetera? Those were those little envelopes back in the day. He said, I get that. But you've got to tell me why I should give, and more importantly, why I should give to you. Because there are a lot of nonprofits out there doing great work, and they're telling their stories better than the church is telling them. I want to be thanked. I want to be informed. So this building those relationships is really key. Now, this may rile some people up. Pastors should have access to donor giving records. That's a fundamental philosophy that we have at Horizons, and boy, have I been beaten up for that before. But my philosophy is most priests can handle things that are taking place confidentially within their congregation, such as the impending divorce, a loss of a job, things that are perhaps even darker than that. And if they can handle that, they can probably handle the donor records. Now, if that's the case that you don't think you can do that, or your church doesn't want you to do that, or have access to them, then perhaps it's best to find out who are your 10 largest donors in alphabetical order and be certain to thank them for their generosity. So we should be thanking more than we are asking. And I'm hoping that you are doing or providing quarterly statements toward generosity and giving. But as my son would say as well to the same group of people that he was talking to, I don't need a country club with a cross. I need a church. I need a church that understands where I am on my journey of faith and helps me through that and to move forward. So you want to build those personal relationships with your financial leaders to learn their passions, their motivations, and their stories of generosity. And remembering that every gift counts and every giver is important. There are those who will say, I can only give $2 a week. The church doesn't really need that money. The donor needs to make that as their offering, as their gift, based on their relationship and their resources. So I never think that there's a gift too small. I just want people to feel like that they can be a generous person. Making the ask, people are most likely to grow their generosity habits when they are challenged to take their next step. So there are multiple ways to give. There's your annual stewardship, your special stewardship offerings, capital campaigns, and legacy giving. And I hope that you have something in place for your legacy giving. I worked last year with a church in Washington, D.C. with 3 Tiffany stained glass windows, and learned that they did not have an endowment or anything set up for legacy giving. So I would hope that you would work in that direction. And then I'm hoping that you're providing portals for giving, like website, text, an app, whatever that might be. I know of a church that has been very effective in the past in using text to give or online giving, but during COVID, they found that their check writing has actually increased. And so this church just decided that they would realize who those people are and thank them for it. And they even sent out about 3 envelopes pre-stamped to say, thanks for your continued gift. And we've provided you a few envelopes as well with stamps to return your gift. So in a way, they're saying thank you. They're providing a resource for them. Years ago, I did not like the idea that people could give via credit card, because I knew the church was going to take a 5 to 6% hit financially on every transaction, and that most people were using that credit card to gain airline points, whatever that might be. And this oldest son again came back and shared with me. He said, I'm employed by one of the largest banks in the world. I don't own checks. If the church wants me to give, I have to give by credit card. And I know that it's going to cost the church money. So his recommendation to the church was include in your online giving the ability to cover the cost of that transaction. It's just a click of a button. And recently I went on a church's website to make a donation that I'm working with right now, just to see how that worked for them. It didn't work well, but in the process, I did learn that I put my $10 donation in, big spender that I am, and there was a little box to check that said, cover the expenses of this transaction. At the end of that, the additional dollar amount was, or cents, was 61 cents. So my $10 donation was actually $10.61, and I was happy to cover that cost. So that's a way of effectively working through that. And this is just the way that people work today. One thing I want to encourage you to do is instill recurring giving. In other words, people sign up to give weekly or monthly, and it becomes an automatic thing. Now, this isn't going back to the days of the Baptist envelopes with I check my box for reading my Bible study. I check my box for giving and for worship attendance, but this is simply kind of the way we find ourselves today. So work in that direction. There are a lot of different resources that can provide you that electronic means of giving. And after all of this is over, if you'd like me to assist you with any clarifications around those, I'm happy to do that. I don't, in these webinars, promote one over another. So the third bullet down says, be clear about what you are asking, what the next step is, and when you will follow up. This is more of a personalized communication. And when thanking and asking, no, dear member, and I'm going to show you an example of a no, dear member that's actually quite a lovely thank you letter. I couldn't do it today. My assistant, Kim Yowell, and Latricia could easily do a mail merge. I can't I don't even know how to start that thing. But you can use mail merge, in which you can say, Dear Mr. and Mrs. Williams, or Dear Bob and Mary. So that more personalized approach is far better. And my son, who also is the one I keep referring to, said, even in today's world, I work electronically with no paper. But when I want to send a thank you note, I send it hard copy. And measuring effectiveness, we talked about this earlier about your mean, median, and mode. So your giving metrics. If there's a first-time giver strategy, that would be helpful. The first-time giver really needs to be able to understand that they've been recognized, and it's just a simple thanks. A lapsed giver strategy is really working toward that when you recognize and you have accessibility to donor giving records. Lapsed givers are probably one of the first measures of wondering what might be going on. Is it a loss of a job? Is it unhappiness with the parish? I often think that people often vote with their wallets. So if you know that somebody has gone from giving $100 a week to $10 a week, something may be going on, and that might simply be a phone call, not to relay that information, but simply to say, hey, Bob, I'm checking in on you just to see how things are going, because that can then become a ministry need, an effective way of communicating and thanking and understanding their situation and relationship. And measure your movement of parish giving levels. So again, going back to the mean, median, and mode, just kind of how are you doing each year? Our parishioners are growing older in our denomination. And I have one parish who recently just took a look at their demographics, and they looked at the 60-year-olds and older into 10-year increments. They even looked at what percentage of their budget was being funded by that group of 60 to 70-year-olds, 70, 80-year-olds, 80-plus-year-olds, and started measuring the loss of income to the church as a result of just that demographic loss. So just kind of sitting by and waiting to see what happens doesn't really work, or it's not quite as effective as we could be. Here's a thank you note. Thank you for your recent pledge payment of $1,000. Support from donors like you is critical to our work. This has been a particularly challenging financial year, and we are running a deficit into the summer months. I hope you will consider participating in our special summer slump appeal to enable us to continue throughout the summer. So there's an example of an okay thank you note. It starts with Dear Member. They didn't go as negative as I've heard some churches go, and when they're talking about just running a summer deficit and perhaps making this up. I've seen a lot of churches falling into the category of sinking ship. If you don't give, we're doomed, kind of a thing. And they say it better than that, let's be honest. But the point there is, as our founder, Cliff Christopher, has said numerous times, people don't give to a sinking ship. And so the effectiveness can be quite strong if we put it in more positive terms, and yet in sharing where we find ourselves today. That's an example. Here's a relational thank you letter. It starts with, Dear Christine, I wanted you to know how much St. John's Youth Group has meant to me. I was fortunate enough to be able to go on the Nicaragua mission trip. So you can see this is coming from someone who's made this trip. Because of St. John's, I am now entering into the pre-med program at University of Michigan. Boy, is that a life story. Thank you for your generosity and support of the youth program. You have made it possible for me to find God's purpose for my life. Sincerely, Amy. Here is a longer thank you letter with permission from this church in North Carolina. And I may read this to you because it's a little bit wordy. I pray that this letter finds you safe and healthy and your loved ones as well. In these very difficult times, we are reminded not to take health and love for granted. Among those lines, it is clear that you do not take the ministries of our community of faith for granted. The letter is long overdue in thanking you for your financial support of Davidson College Presbyterian Church, generally and especially during this pandemic. Next week at our session meeting, I will be sharing with the session that despite what some might have feared, the church is in a strong financial position. Through the end of May, we are ahead of last year in giving. And since expenses are down, we are also in a stronger position in terms of income to expenses. This is due in part to you. You are one of a group of people who clearly made a decision to show your support for our ministries when we needed it most. From paying off a pledge in full to donating a stimulus check to making gifts that weren't pledged or simply being well ahead of the game. On paying off a pledge, you and the other people in this group made a difference. I do not presume to think that this was an easy or convenient thing. I just know it was gracious and that I am grateful. While other organizations are doing more with less and wondering whom to lay off and what to cut, we are continuing to ask, how do we deploy member resources and staff time to help people during this pandemic? Please do not underestimate the importance of your giving and its timing, especially right now. Lives have been changed for the better because of your faithfulness in sharing the resources God gave you with the church and our ministries. From upgrading digital connections to making planned gifts, to local nonprofits, to employing staff who check on isolated members, your giving has empowered vital ministries. I do pray that I will get to see you in person at some point in 2020. There is a lot of this that is up in the air. In the meantime, please let us know if DPCP, which is for the church, can be doing more for you and your family. Again, thank you. Stay safe and healthy. Grace and peace, your pastor. Sensitive approach, thankful approach. One of the things that I'm worried about right now for parishes, if you took advantage of the PPP loan, which I hope you did, you basically ended up with 13 months of giving. And if your expenses are down, you're feeling pretty good at this point in time. We're not seeing that the PPP loan will be brought back to churches. And so we're kind of fearful, frankly, for 2021 and how the church will be responsive during that period of time. So, but I thought this was a lovely, lovely thank you letter. Now, here are some examples of my colleague, Christine Miller, who sent in a thank you, or who sent in a donation. And this is what she received on the top left. Thank you for your support of, in the amount of $25. Personal information, billing information, bill transaction details, etc. A very financial statement. To the top right, thank you for your support of. Your contribution has been processed. The payment amount is $10. The Visa number ending in 4 digits by credit card. The bottom one is the one I want you to pay attention to. I got notice of a gift from you to WCC, the church. That's amazingly generous of you to make a gift. Thank you. It's been so meaningful to connect with new people from near and far, one of the few good things to come out of this whole mess. Consider joining my wife Sheila and me with other new friends tonight at 6:30 p.m. for a quick hello, and the Zoom address there. So thanks again. Stay in touch, be well, stay home, and know that you are loved. I'll take that thank you and recognition of a gift over the top two. And this is simply just a setting up. If you have your online giving already set up through one of your providers, this can easily be changed to what you see there at the bottom. This also would apply to your quarterly statements. So if you're sending a quarterly statement that simply says, Dear Bill and Mary, or Dear church member, given today, $200, pledge for the year, $400, that doesn't inspire me. That's just a transaction that could come from my electric provider, my gas provider, my country club, whatever it might be. Drop in one of those little stories. Drop in something that, like this last little thank you that implies a recognition, a more personal recognition. I'm going to skip this video. I'm not sure it will actually play, but it stops me to tell you that this video is really coming from a non-denominational church about giving. And This is the pastor. I don't think I can play it, but what I want to draw from is this. Some years ago, I was working in California with a priest, Carol Anderson. Carol was one of the very first female priests ordained. She was at one of the fastest growing Episcopal parishes in Los Angeles County. She was in the heart of Beverly Hills. This was All Saints Beverly Hills, which you would think, oh my goodness, that's rich, that's everything you would think. It's the biggest amalgamation of unique membership, drawing from all over Los Angeles County. And somewhere in discussion, Carol and I were talking about the wonderful things that they were doing. And I said, Carol, where do you come up with these ideas? And her response was, I go to the Willow Creek conference every year. And my jaw dropped, and I got this kind of a sneering look on my face. And I said, Willow Creek? And she said, yes. I said, why would an Episcopal priest go to Willow Creek? A very evangelical organization and church. And her response was, Terry, I can take their ideas. I can shave off the rough edges. I can make them into something that would fit All Saints Church. And it's working. And it was working so well that while Carol was at All Saints, they were processing and providing workshops for other Episcopal churches. And so it was quite effective. So I'm not even going to try to play this. Basically what he was talking about is our giving is doing well, etc. So the next slide I want to show you is a sample fall generosity calendar. There's a lot here to unpack. Why we happen to call something week 0 is an interesting approach, but take a look at the sermon title that we suggested and what might follow with that. So we're suggesting a sermon that might be on the power of prayer. Sensitivity is this. Pray about how you've been blessed and how you would be a blessing to others through giving to your parish. That's not pressuring anybody into doing anything. That's a sensitive approach. And you might begin a devotional book on generosity and use that as a daily email. Week 1, a sermon. Generosity journey is grounded in gratitude, revealed through prayer, and lived in faith. So how do you work through those parts? I think you have to start with gratitude. It was Henry Nouwen in his little book, pamphlet on stewardship and giving. And he says basically that we start with prayer. And out of that is our response to give to the kingdom of God. And if you don't have that little booklet, I think it's called The Spirituality of Fundraising. It's available through the Henry Nouwen Association. And when I came to work for Horizons about 5 years ago, I read this and I thought, good Lord, that's the Henry Nouwen philosophy right there. Grounded in gratitude, revealed through prayer, and then lived in faith. Week 2, week 1, offering talk and a stewardship story. Week 2, a sermon on the rector's giving story. Getting personal now, aren't we? This is sharing your own story. You don't have to give your amount by any means, but just why you give and the joy of giving and what that means to you. Another offering talk and a stewardship story. Week 3 is a sermon, why give to your church? This echoes back to my son, why should I give to you? So this is where you want to talk about a lot of your ministries and the resources that you're providing to other organizations, things like that. Week 4, a sermon on every gift counts and every giver is important, and receive pledges online and in worship. Right now, for us at Incarnation, I think we are having a couple of services that are meeting in person, but one is outside. I can't imagine in the summer heat. One is on the inside of the sanctuary or of the church itself. I always revert back to sanctuary like I'm a Baptist. But we know this year we're going to have to do a lot of receiving of pledges online and electronically. Here's a hint. It's not in this material. Change your term if you're using pledge card to estimate of giving. Change it from pledge card to estimate of giving. Pledge cards sounds contractual. It also kind of sounds like the church is going to come after me if I can't honor my pledge. And this is not the season to be feeling like you're signing a contract. Back in 08 and 09, my best friend had made a sizable donation to his church for a capital campaign. And we remember what happened back in 08 and 09 financially. And over drinks and dinner one night, he said to me, I'm really alarmed and concerned that I can't honor my pledge. My business is down dramatically, and Terry, I can't do it. What do I do? And my comment was to him, your church is going to understand that completely. Just let your finance office know that you're going to have to alter your pledge, or these were 3-year pledges, or if you have a chance, offer them, can I have another year to honor my pledge, or another 2 years to honor my pledge? Worked fine, but move from pledge card to estimate of giving. It really does work. There are a lot of people who work on commissions, and they don't know what their actual income will be. That's my son. He has a very nice annual salary, but come March or April, he has a bonus that can almost double his salary. So he doesn't know, and that's the extreme. He doesn't know what he's going to make. But those in the service industry who are dependent upon tips, who is my youngest son, won't know what he's going to make next year for 2021. So if he can say estimate of giving and not pledge card, it works. Weeks 6 and 7 are relational thank you notes to all who pledged or gave. Now, I'm guessing that most of you have not used week 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 that lead up to online gift or a commitment Sunday. And if that seems too much, scale that back, but maybe use 2 or 3 of these. But if you'll notice, these are not heavy pushes. They are a soft approach and a spiritual approach to supporting the ministries of the church. So there's a fall generosity calendar that you can have access to. Then the last thing I want to share with you before we get to questions and answers, and I think we've got ample time for those, and I may not have all the answers, so I'm going to be dependent on Michael and Janet to share as well. But Giving 365 is a repository of all things stewardship and generosity that are free, provided by Horizons. Now, you do have to sign up for it, and you do have to provide your email address. And periodically, you'll receive some information from Horizons. Never a solicitation, but just to keep you in the fold and providing you some additional new resources that we keep adding to this repository. So I think we've got it fixed that if everybody that's online right now goes to giving365.com and signs up for it, you won't bust the system. That happened earlier when we had a webinar of about 150 people, and they all went on at one time, and the whole thing kind of blew up. But go ahead and sign up for it, and then come back at a later date and start digging around in there. You're going to find remarkable resources that people continue to tell us, and they say, why are you doing this? You're giving away part of the store, and or part of the farm, or however you want to say it. And the truth is, we just prefer that the church have some of the best resources that we can make available to be successful in their area of generosity and stewardship. And that's what we do. So we are a company that does annual stewardship, capital campaigns, periodic coaching, feasibility studies. If it's legacy giving, if it's any of those things, generosity and stewardship related, you're going to find it in Giving 365. And I truly encourage you to find your way there and sign up for it. I think you'll be pleased. Also, my name is there on the screen, and my email address is there. So if you'd like to reach out to me with any questions that you might have after we allow for this question and answer time, I'm very happy to help you. So.